This happened in my junior year of college, and I've never forgotten a moment of it since. It's been nearly a decade since this all went down, since I changed universities, moved 2 towns and then eventually an entire state over, and spent the whole time trying to scrub these events from my mind. Of course, to no avail, every second of it is fresh like it was yesterday. In my junior year, I had been attending the University of Oklahoma as a biology major. I had wanted to go for pre-med, but felt like I wasn't ready to lose the ability to both be in school and still get blackout drunk most nights. I wasn't very smart in other aspects of my life, but that's neither here nor there. My girlfriend's name was Caddy. We met in our sophomore year at some coffee shop a little way off campus. I wouldn't really say we had a meet cute, considering I nearly took her eye out with the front end of my pen while she was walking by my little table. Of course, her eye had remained intact, and I had spent nearly half an hour apologizing and even offered to buy her a latte or whatever she drank to make up for it. Really, I just wanted to keep talking to her. Caddy was easygoing and unshamingly flirtatious, and she sat with me and sipped some non-fat coffee drink that was all milk and no coffee. From there, it had been like clockwork. A whirlwind college romance story that featured coffee dates and a lot of missed classes. After almost a year together, Caddy had moved in with me at my apartment and made it hers. I didn't mind, obviously. I just wanted to spend all my time with her. And in case you were wondering, the thought of being pre-med hadn't crossed my mind in months. In fact, I was slacking so hard in my studies that my scholarship was barely hanging on by a thread. Caddy was like no other girl I had ever met before. And believe me, I know how that sounds. Like I'm a love-struck idiot that falls hard and fast for the first girl to give me any kind of attention. I swear it wasn't like that, but in hindsight, I don't think I even knew what it was. I just knew Caddy and I were meant to be together. I haven't told you what Caddy looked like, and maybe it's because, after all these years, I'm still too selfish to share her with anyone. She had this olive skin that put my own milky complexion to shame, and dark hair that stopped at the small of her back, always curly and smelling like peaches. She was intoxicating. But what I loved most about Caddy were her eyes. They were a brilliant blue and shone in the dark, almost piercing if she fixed you with the right or wrong look. It was hard to take her seriously sometimes, during fights or arguments, when she looked at me with a glare meant to kill. All I saw was my Caddy, ocean-eyed and beautiful. It wasn't almost until 8 months into our relationship that Caddy let me in on her big secret, that she wore colored contacts. She said she'd been afraid to tell me because of how much I loved her eyes. I smiled and told her she was ridiculous. Of course, I loved her eyes, but they weren't that important to the grand scheme of things. I loved her because of who she was, how kind and warm she was. She lit up when I told her I didn't care what color her eyes were, and she kissed me, batted her colored eyes at me a few times, and then kissed me again. After that, I noticed that she would switch her contacts out a lot. Most days she would stick with blue, but some days they were a gorgeous gemstone green or sterling gray. She still looked gorgeous, despite whatever color she wore that day, and I always made sure to tell her. Her smile was always worth it. Caddy refused to change her contacts or even take them out when I was in the room with her. I didn't really see what the big deal was, considering I was an avid contact wearer myself, and was no stranger to people sticking their fingers in their eyes to take them out. Regardless, I still left the room whenever she changed her contacts or took them out before bed. As I said, it wasn't a big deal to me, but Caddy told me that she felt uncomfortable when people watched her fiddle with her contacts. Something about always dropping them or whatever when someone was looking, whatever that meant. It wasn't until the start of my senior year that I had seen Caddy take her contacts out. We were still living in my apartment and our relationship was as good as the day we met. I was actually browsing for engagement rings on my lunch breaks at work. The little boy fantasy of marrying a gorgeous woman unfolding in my brain. I couldn't help it though. I loved Caddy and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. It helped that I knew she wouldn't say no. It had been a Thursday night and I had gotten home from work. We'd had dinner together and watched some stupid movie on the TV, more enthralled with each other than the 3-star blockbuster they were showing. I had just gotten out of the shower and was making my way to our bedroom. The door was ajar and I saw Caddy on her side of the bed, opening up her contact case. I leaned against the doorframe, hidden from Caddy, and couldn't help but smile to myself. There sat my gorgeously weird girlfriend, who I've never seen naked and who I've seen cry tears and snot before more times I could count, who was still too nervous to let me see her switch her contacts. I noticed her contact case was a lot bigger than any of the ones I'd ever used myself, but shrugged it off. Whatever. Contact cases were always different wherever you got them from. I stood and watched as Caddy raised her hand to her left eye, presumably to pinch the contact and take it out. I felt the breath leave my lungs as I watched her pluck her entire left eye out of her head. She was completely still as she did so, humming to herself as she used her other hand to screw open the other side of her large contact case and drop the eye she was holding into it. With her right eye still intact, she reached around behind her and pulled out another contact case. I realized these were the eyes she was going to put on instead. I watched her complete this process with ease, switching out her eyes and cleaning up any mess she left behind. She neatly put both contact cases in her bedside drawer and shut it. She blinked slowly a few times like she was letting her new eyes adjust to her skull. I felt bile rising in my throat. I'm not sure how long I stood there, motionless. My eyes had glazed over at one point, and I was so sure that I couldn't have seen what I thought I had. There's no way that my girlfriend of 2 years, the woman that I was planning to ask to marry me, had just plucked out both her eyes and put in a new set. When I felt like I could feel my feet again, I walked into our bedroom and sat down on my side of the bed, still wrapped in a towel from my shower. Caddy was sitting up in bed underneath the covers, reading a book. She smiled at me when I laid down next to her, raising her hand and stroking my hair a little. She asked me if I was ready for bed, and I nodded. We turned the lights off, and before rolling off to our respected sides, she kissed me. She pulled away and looked at me with someone else's green eyes. The rest of that night went by in a flash. I didn't even bother sleeping. I waited until Caddy was fast asleep and snoring softly before I quietly crept around to her side of the bed. I opened her bedside drawer and peeked in. There were dozens of those contact cases scattered next to empty wrappers and water bottles. If this were any other kind of situation, I would have made fun of her of how much of a slob she was. I grabbed a handful of cases and crept to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and sat on the closed toilet seat. I didn't know how badly my hands were shaking until I brought one of the cases closer to my face. I unscrewed the cap. An eyeball looked back at me. It was bobbling in some kind of clear liquid solution that stank of chemicals. I wondered briefly, what kind of chemical was necessary to keep eyes fresh? Keep them on ice. I left that night. I put Caddy's cases back and packed a bag. Clothes, chargers, my wallet, even my passport. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't come back there. I didn't want to. I dropped out of the University of Oklahoma the next day. I remembered getting in my car and just driving. My phone rang a dozen times, presumably Caddy freaking out and wanting to ask me where I was. I never picked up. That was 10 years ago. I returned back to college when I was 28, settling in a small town in Kansas called Lebanon. I've never gotten married. I still have nightmares of what I found in Caddy's drawer. Nightmares of her finding me and coming from my eyes. She always told me they were such a pretty color. Shout out to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan and Tacy. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to creating more content for everyone.